Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. In this lecture, we're going to talk about what every single man needs to know about women. How do women think and how are they different from men? So, point number one. Women need reassurance that they're always loved. Women always need to feel loved, appreciated, and cherished. The biggest problem here is that men take women's love for granted. Of course I know my wife loves me. I don't need to prove it to her. But see, the question is not whether she knows it or not. The question is, are you showing it? Are you demonstrating it? You see, men are very logical and rational. They reason, I'm providing for my wife, I'm paying her rent, I'm coming home to her at night, I'm taking care of the house. Of course, she must logically and rationally see that I love her. But women are not thinking things through in the same type of manner. They're feeling things in an emotional sense. So, for example, if the husband is often silent, as most men are, if the husband does not talk about his problems, most men don't, if the husband withdraws into his cave, if the husband is busy at work, for many women, this is taken as a signal that he does not love her. Now, we've talked about how to show love in other sections of this course, but briefly, to reiterate, number one, verbal assurances, words of affirmation. I love you never goes out of style in any language. It never loses its charm. It never loses that gazazz that comes with that phrase, and it needs to be said continuously. But it's not just that phrase. It's positive reassurance. It's affirmation. It's taking into account the good that she does. Number two, physical reassurance. Lots of touching, lots of hugging, lots of kissing, all non-sexual here. Remember, for women, it's the non-sexual hugging and kissing that makes them feel cherished and loved. Number three, companionship. For men, this is the most difficult because men do not open up for their problems and worries. But for a woman, this is what is the most important for them. So open up and show you're a genuine companion to her. Tell her your fears and worries and expect her to tell you hers. This is really what a woman wants, that emotional connection with a man. Also realize that when she is emotional, don't just walk away into your cave. Just listen. You're the man. Try to keep your cool as much as possible. You want to handle your feelings alone. She wants to handle her feelings in your company. Realize, when a woman does become emotional, it's because she's trying to connect with you. When you become emotional, then generally speaking, as a man, you want to walk away from the scene of the crime, if you like, or the scene of the sword, of the tension. You want to go into your man cave. But for a woman, walking away at a time of argument is seen as if a rejection for her companionship. If you want to, you can tell her, honey, I need to calm down. Let me think things through. We'll talk about this in half an hour, in 1 hour. That's fine. You don't have to be there. But whatever you do not just turn your back and walk away. That's the worst thing you can do in an argument. If you cannot resolve it, right then and there, tell her when you will resolve it. And try your best to keep your cool, because realize, for women, being emotional does not have the same connotation as it does for a man. For women, it's much more natural to be emotional, much more natural to be agitated and whatnot. For men, to be emotional and agitated really is asking for trouble. And therefore, do understand, take it in stride, and try to resolve any conflict at the time or at a time that you set. In any case, the first point here, constant reassurance that she is loved. The second point, which is a follow-up of this point, thought process. By this I mean, women think very differently than men. Now, most men believe that women are emotional creatures. Now, there might be some basic truth to that statement, but this is a cliched statement. But what does it mean that women are emotional? Well, one of the ways that this translates into is that a woman's thought process is different than a man. Generally speaking, a man focuses on one primary thought at one time. He solves it and he moves on. And unless he's in a really bad mood, generally he can ignore other issues. He can ignore other emotions and get his work done. He might be having a really bad argument with his wife. The next day at work, generally speaking, he'll do just as good of a job as he did yesterday and as he's going to do tomorrow. He can, we call it compartmentalize. He can take a problem and he can throw it into a compartment and he can just simply shove it aside and concentrate on another problem at one given time. For a woman, she's going through multiple thought processes at the same time. She's dealing with mundane issues. She's going over the household chores. She's dealing with emotional stress. For a guy, this simply is impossible to imagine. Let me put this in a real-life example. Suppose you're working on a computer, simultaneously writing up a speech in one window, editing a schedule on Excel in another, preparing a PowerPoint presentation for the masjid on the third, and also dealing with incoming viruses with an antivirus program, all the while people are emailing you. Can you imagine anybody doing this simultaneously? Obviously not. We do one thing, we move on to another, we move on to another. You need to understand, for women, they truly can multitask. Let me translate this into daily experience. I'll tell you myself. And I don't mind, taking the joke on myself here. Whenever I have to cook a dish, whenever I have to be in the kitchen, I need to literally go through a checklist, concentrate on one dish at a time, and make sure that it is going fine. If I decide to multitask, for example, check emails while the food is cooking and take care of the kid and prepare the dessert and take for the bread, believe me, the meal's not going to be cooked. I just cannot do that. Yet my wife somehow miraculously every day simultaneously manages to do 4 or 5 or 6 tasks at a time, managing the kids yelling and screaming, making sure the house is done, do the chores, do the dishes, do all of the stuff that needs to be done. A man needs to understand a woman is capable of doing multiple processes simultaneously. What does this translate into for a man and a woman? Well, for one thing, it's very easy for a woman to jump from one topic to another in her conversation. For the man, it's like, where did that... She completely stopped. Completely stopped, because she's literally going from project A to project B, and in her mind, it's working. For a man, this seems disoriented. For a man, he's not quite following along. And this is so frustrating for a man who has never been married before, and then he gets married, and then he finds his wife, he's talking about one thing, and she might say something totally unrelated. Or the conversation will change from point A to point B, and he doesn't understand why. She's not being disrespectful. This is the way that her thought processes are working. Also, this also leads to another issue which every single husband is familiar with. Women never forget anything done in the past. No matter how many years or decades or centuries have passed, right? It's very common for a past item or a past mistake or a past issue to be brought up. For a man who is just thinking of a current problem or a current issue or a current argument, it doesn't make any sense that a past item is brought up. But for a woman, sometimes it's going to be brought up in 2 months, in 2 weeks, in 2 years, in 20 years. Whatever the issue is, again, it's something that is in her mind. And therefore, do realize this is rather natural for a woman, that every man needs to realize that for a woman to bring up something in the past, it's pretty common. It is the way that their thought process works. Also, this another fact which is very frustrating for men, that women can be engaged in intimacy. They can be literally the husband is in the heat of the moment, and their minds are on something totally different. For example, the chores for tomorrow, taking care of the kids, the bills, the groceries. And sometimes she happens to verbalize what she's thinking about when the husband is in the passion of the moment. And there goes his romance. Well, again, this is a part and parcel of being a woman. It's very natural for a woman to multitask. She's thinking about all of these things together. And this is something women do need to realize. When their husbands are aroused, when their husbands are in the heat of the moment, when their husbands are turned on, there's only one thing on their minds, and that's sex. For her to bring up anything not related to sex is a big mood kill. It just destroys the entire moment. It really hurts the husband that he's involved with her. He's showing his love. Again, remember the languages of love. Remember, for the husband, this is love. And then she brings up, oh honey, don't forget to take the garbage out, tomorrow morning. And it's just so frustrating for the husband that he's in the middle of the moment, in the middle of this passion, and her mind is multitasking to something else. But again, this is something that men need to understand, that women do not compartmentalize their thought processes. Men, on the other hand, do compartmentalize. So a man needs to understand that he should never assume how a woman thinks, never assume that her irritation is because of you or because of anything until you verify it. The best thing you can do is to allow her to talk through her issues and to be a friend for her. Third point. Women need emotional security. We mentioned earlier that a man always feels the need to provide for his family, primarily financially. And alhamdulillah, that's a great and necessary thing. But what most men don't realize is that for women, they are more in need of emotional security than financial. What this translates into is that when the husband is working long hours in the office, he feels he's doing a really good job taking care of his wife. He's working his behind off to give her what she deserves. However, from her perspective, she is saying, my husband's rarely home. Perhaps, he doesn't have that connection with me. Perhaps he's not as close to me as he should be. Perhaps he doesn't love me enough. Subhanallah. Many men, they tend to assume that just because women like to shop, they are more materialistic than men. But the fact of the matter is that the average woman would value a strong and good emotional relationship with a poor husband over an insecure relationship with a rich husband. In one study, almost 90% of women surveyed said that they would prefer a man who took a lower paying job if he spent more time in the house. Think about that, brothers. A woman, 90% of women said they would rather prefer a husband has a lower income, less money, if he spends time at home. So the husband needs to work to develop that sense of security in a woman, the emotional security, just as he's got to work to ensure financial security. You have to work to ensure emotional security. Husbands, men, never assume that just because you're paying the bills, and just because you have a big house, and just because you're taking care of the financial needs, and just because you're having sex with her at night, that you are showing her emotional security. Emotional security is not dependent on these factors. How do you show her emotional security? By the small things. Keeping in touch regularly, texting her, calling her from the office, making time for her, quality time. Every evening or every week, spending some time with her, being an active part of your household, communicating, opening up to her. Even if you're working long hours, remind her that, honey, this is for you. This is for the future of the children. Talk. And you know what? There is a compromise as well. Perhaps she does have a point. Perhaps you are spending too much time in the office. Realize that. Your family, your wife, your children, they have a right over you as well, as do their finances. Try to find that middle balance. But the bottom line, emotional security. A woman needs to be reminded that she's loved, she's cherished, she's appreciated. And the fourth point, a man needs to know that what a woman really wants is a partner and a friend. For a woman, the ideal husband is her best friend. And for a man, that's not necessarily the case, is that he might have a best friend and his wife is not his best friend. That sometimes happens. For a man, he can love his wife to death, but she's not considered her best friend. He needs to realize if he wants his wife to genuinely love him, she does need to become his best friend. For a woman, the ideal husband is a best friend. And what is a best friend? Well, a best friend is somebody who's going to listen with care, who's going to pay attention, who's going to sympathize. And really, and we've been saying this from the very beginning, and this is probably the most common point that is brought up in all books dealing with the differences between men and women. And that is that women want to connect on an emotional level. Simple example of this. Men and women talk for different reasons. When a man discusses a problem, he wants to speak as little as possible. He doesn't want somebody to listen for a long period of time. He wants somebody to solve